Hey, y'all. Thank you for tuning in today. If you are new to the AfterMeth Podcast, welcome to the family. If you've been listening for a while, thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking time to listen to this podcast. There are so many options out there. Although we're the only podcast that I know of that's focusing on this particular topic. But there are so many options for you to be listening to between YouTube and social media and everything else. But you're choosing the AfterMeth Podcast, and I really, really appreciate that very, very, very much. And I want you to congratulate yourself on listening to this podcast, because this could be very, very instrumental in your recovery. When it comes to recovery, many of us have a tendency to have tunnel vision. And that's why I've said it time and time again. When you tell me your goal is to quit meth, I'm going to say, well, okay, that's the easy part. But what other vision do you have for yourself? Here's the thing. When you set an intention to become your best and highest version, meth use naturally falls away. And along with that comes the hard work. That's peeling back all of the layers of trauma, pinpointing the beliefs that you have about yourself and the world, and then processing them for the ultimate healing, which in its basic form is perspective shift. Being able to see life experience in a new way is truly the key to recovery. Being able to see life experience in a new way is truly the key to recovery. Yes, I repeated it. The key to recovery, healing, and happiness. Everything we have experienced and will experience is neutral. You decide through your thoughts the meaning that experience has. That's how you create reality. And one way of doing this difficult work is through EMDR. And today, I'm happy to bring you a very qualified facilitator of EMDR, and he does lots of other treatments too. His name is Drake. I want you to really home in on the techniques and the theories behind EMDR treatment. Even if you're not interested in the treatment itself, the techniques and the theories behind it. You don't have to do EMDR, but understanding the philosophies behind this therapy could not only break the patterns of chemsex, but equip you for a more peaceful and whole life. And that's really what I want for you. All right, enjoy. The AfterMeth Podcast is an outreach tool to help men who have sex with men break free from the addictive patterns associated with chemsex, otherwise known as crystal meth or TINA. I'm your host, Dr. Dallas Bragg, a former crystal meth user, now recovery coach. Here you will find a repository of tools and resources intended to eradicate the epidemic that is plaguing our MSM population. Please note that the views expressed on this podcast are not to be taken as medical advice. Also, we will be talking about drugs and sex, so if you feel triggered to use, stop listening and contact your local emergency system and or your support network. Let's go. Welcome back to the AfterMeth Podcast. Very glad you are here today, and I have my list, so I do not want to forget all the housekeeping, and sorry you have to sit through it, but one day if you do it all, you won't have to worry about it. And sorry you have to sit through it, Drake. But there is a supplemental study guide that comes out with every one of the podcasts. I want to make sure that you know that I am doing all I can to give you as much free information and free resources as I can. And if there's something else that you would like for free, tell me. Do not be afraid to speak up. I do very well with feedback, but there is a study guide that comes with every podcast so that you don't just listen to it. You can actually apply it and integrate it into your life. It'll have journal prompts, reflective questions. It has actionable exercises. It has a review of what we talk about today. So if you want to get that, the link to it is in the show notes, or you can go to drdallasbragg.com and subscribe to my newsletter. It's a blog on the website, but the newsletter will come to your email. I know it's very complicated, but subscribe anyway, and you'll get all my emails. Because I also send out a newsletter every Monday that's also a workable newsletter. We have a Facebook community. If you're still on Facebook, that is a free Facebook community called the AfterMeth Podcast. I will ask for advice on there, like what did y'all think of the podcast? Do you have any suggestions on topics? And then we support each other too. There's a lot of people in there that are currently using and go there for a little bit of support, and we celebrate wins, of course. You can watch the podcast on our YouTube account, the AfterMeth Podcast. If you search for me, the AfterMeth Podcast, it will autocorrect to Aftermath, and you will get completely different podcasts. So AfterMeth Podcast, be sure that you autocorrect it to that. Speaking of free, I do have a free course. It's called Reframing Relapse. It's 28 days of video modules, journal prompts, guided meditations, and a free coaching session with me. So that is free. The link will be in the show notes as well. Also, if you have not rated and reviewed, which a lot of you have, I just actually went and checked the other day and I was like, oh yeah, people are listening here. They are rating and reviewing. Very nice. I appreciate that. I have a 4.9 on Apple, so I'm not sure where that came from, but if you could give me a 5, that'd be great. But if I'm less than 5, again, let me know. I like to hear it. But if you've already done that, if you could share the podcast on your social media, that would be great. Or word of mouth, share it with someone that you think would benefit from it. There's a lot of topics that we talk on here about that would be beneficial for loved ones of those who are in the addictive patterns of crystal meth or chemsex. So loved ones can learn a lot about the nature and the nuances of this particular experience and this particular substance. So I think it's helpful for quite a bit of people. So that being said, I'm going to introduce my guest, and I made the mistake of not asking how to pronounce your last name before we went live. So I'm going to guess it's Drake Schoeppl.
Schoeppl, yeah, you're good.
Schoeppl?
Mm-hmm.
Schoeppl, okay. Sorry. Where's that from? What last name is it?
It's like Austrian. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I read that you're half Latinx and half white, though.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, so half Mexican, half Austrian.
Half Mexican, yeah. Okay, yeah, I did a little bit of research this time. But let's introduce Drake. Drake is an LCSW, licensed therapist practicing in both Florida and Illinois. He has spent years of experience working with PTSD. I think we can all relate to that. Depression, anxiety, LGBTQ plus individuals, complex trauma, addiction, and relational issues. He takes a holistic and trauma-informed approach and believes that one's culture is integral in treatment. He's worked in a variety of roles, from being a crisis therapist responding to 911 calls related to mental health, a therapist in an inpatient psychiatric unit, a substance use rehabilitation center, and working with the LGBTQ plus youth and young adults and their families. How old are you, Drake? It's like, how did you do all that? You look so young, like a baby.
I know. I finished grad school pretty early.
Good for you. Drake, we met on Instagram, and I've really enjoyed watching your posts and you living your best life in Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah, it's been.
I love it. So thank you and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yeah. No, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So I was looking over your website. Your website is called ignitinghope.info. So Igniting Hope Counseling with a picture of a sparkler. What does that mean to you? What message do you want us to get from that?
Yeah, I find that a lot of people with PTSD and trauma, we tend to isolate ourselves so much, and there's so much negativity and detachment and fear that goes on, right? So I find that a lot of my work really has to do with instilling hope in people, really kind of helping them see the light in life, finding connection, finding ways to repair some of their attachment wounds, some ways to find better relationships so that it doesn't feel so dark, right? I also find that a lot of times it feels very lonely, right? So that darkness, that, fear that kind of clouds us when we've gone through so much trauma or been through so much in life, right? We essentially want to move through that. And kind of, to me, the spark just means kind of creating that in your life in itself, right? That internal resource.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that, because I meet a lot of people who, it's kind of like this dangerous, vicious cycle of they're in this deep depression or they have PTSD, or and they're using to try to calm that or numb that a little bit, right? But the drugs cause more depression.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Right. So I would imagine like seeing some type of hope or a light at the end of the tunnel would be helpful. So do you see, you see so many different types of people, but you also treat men who have sex with men who are addicted or using meth. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. And what do you see there as maybe a common issue or a common problem, I guess, among those?
Yeah, I think it's so variant depending on a lot of different people, but I think the main thing I see tends to be very low self-esteem,
Okay.
and then a fear of relational, aspects of things. When I say relational aspects, I mean like a fear of closeness, a fear of intimacy, a fear of like what it means to be vulnerable, right? It's something I really hear a lot of when it comes to, when we talk about trauma treatment, when men who have sex with men, who also use, meth or other substances, I find that a lot of people, they say things like, meth gave me the confidence that I never had, right? Meth gave me the ability to like myself. It gave me the ability to feel okay to have sex with somebody else, right? Like whether there is like elements of, internalized homophobia there, what it has to do with religion, whether it has to do with, trauma or being bullied or whatever it might be, that kind of like the central themes that make that up, right? I find that to be pretty central in pretty much everyone I work with in that realm, at least.
Mm-hmm. So a fear of intimacy sounds very familiar. A fear of being vulnerable. Do these men come to you while they're still using? Is that something that's common, or is this after use?
So I would say majority of people I've worked with, usually it's while they're still using.
Okay.
Determining like when it comes to level of use, I've pretty variant. Some people it's, almost every day. Some people it's like a few times a month. It just really varies.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is that doable? Is that treatable?
So if we're talking about in terms of EMDR treatment or in terms of just like general?
In general, yeah.
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 Yeah, I think it's, it is, doable. What I will say when it comes to trauma treatment and when it comes to like treatment in general, right? We take more of like the motivational interviewing lens, more the person-centered lens of, at least I do at least, like how willing are you to decrease use, right? Can you come to a session not high? Can you come to a session in a place where we can process things, right? I don't want you to be getting off a bender or 3 or 4 day binge. You're coming to the session because then your brain's not going to be a spot where we can kind of really access the information and kind of tap into some of those neural pathways that maybe are difficult to kind of tap into, right? So that's kind of like the main thing I start with, right? Kind of like, what is their goal? I think a huge thing in terms of treatment with people is that, I want them to feel empowered. I want them to feel like they're the ones making the choices regarding their substance use, right? I'm not here to tell you that you have to decrease. I'm not here to tell you have to stop even, right? Like I'm here more so to meet you where you're at and kind of say, you have all this trauma, you have all these different things that you're working through, right? I care a whole lot more about dealing with the root issues, dealing with some of like that anxiety or those fears than I do with you, using meth to cope with it, right? That's a part of it, of course, right? But of course, I want to do something that's more in our control here, right? Like talking more about like, what are the impulses that make you do that? What are your triggers? Why do you act on them, right? Like providing education about those things. To get back to your question though, like, yes, like it's definitely treatable. Is it difficult? Of course, right? Like any, substance use disorder, any, person kind of struggling using a coping skill that is highly addictive, it's definitely a struggle. But at the same time, I definitely have seen some pretty positive results over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if I come to you and I have layers, right? A lot of us have these layers, right? Like not only was dad mean to us, mean to me, but we're bullied at school, and then we were taught to not be gay, and on and on and on. There's layers. Where do you start? Like, if I have all these layers and it feels overwhelming to try to pick apart, what would you say to me in that?
Well, I think first and foremost, we got to build up some of your resources, right? So like before, really just depends on someone's at, but when I say resources, first part of trauma treatment is stabilization, right? And like, of course, it looks different for every person, but we want to make sure someone's in a place where they can handle having these conversations, where they can handle, they have the tolerance to go into some of this work, right? It can be very intense. So I think the starting point is developing that internal resource of, okay, like, let's get into some of the grounding work. Let's get into some of you learning how to be more in touch with your emotions, being more aware of your emotional experience, right? What makes it so hard for you to process and face your emotions, right? I think starting with some of those things is a starting place, right? Because we can't bypass that work, right? If we jump into, processing trauma and someone's shutting down, someone's dissociating, someone outside a session, because you talked about this, they feel so dysregulated that they're going to go use again. They're going to go hurt themselves or do something really impulsive, right? That's not my goal. I never want to leave someone feeling super dysregulated, right? Of course, part of trauma treatment is activating somebody a little bit and then giving them some of the skills to help regulate. But at the same time, we first really want to start off with helping you regulate. So that way you can be aware of what emotions are happening, right? But even in that same sense, right, we really want to get you in touch with them. So that way we can teach you, okay, well, when I'm feeling stressed out, when I'm feeling sad about this, right? When I have a relational issue where I'm really fearful of what someone's going to think about me, right? It's not just about the situation at hand. It's about all the stuff from the past, right? It's from all the things that have happened to me. It's from all the things I've encountered. Making those connections are kind of a starting point that we really want to start with.
Yeah. Yes, I just want to recap on that. And that is a lot of people that I meet, a lot of guys that I work with, it's hard to connect the value of something simple as grounding.
Yep.
Right? Mm-hmm. They don't want, well, how is putting my feet on the ground? Yeah, that's my basic grounding. But, putting my bare feet on the ground, breathing, holding a tree, right? drinking some water. I don't know. But, how is that helping me? It's an insult to some people, right? Yep. Mm-hmm. But it's such an important first step. Like if you're overwhelmed by the amount of trauma you have to work on, then let's just give you a little goal of just be, 100%. Be, right? Mm-hmm. And I like what you said about awareness and noticing. So if you're listening, just think about this. Like one of the first steps, all you have to do is just be aware of the emotion. Note, and I like to ask, again, I always have to say, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a counselor, but I like to tell people, ask a lot of questions when an emotion comes up. Like where is it in my body? What color is it? What is it trying to tell me? Is it moving? Is it rigid? I don't know. I just, all these questions. By the time by doing that, by being aware and noticing it, you have separated yourself from it. And now you are in control of it. I mean, pretty much, right? Is that right? Yeah. Am I speaking out of turn? Yep.
No, yeah, that's pretty much right. I mean, I think it's some of that separation, right? I think that so many people, going to your point about grounding, so many people, they tend to like, okay, how's this going to help me? There's this big resistance to doing some of it, right? And I think a lot of people think this because when they do breath work, when they do putting their feet on the floor, progressive muscle relaxation, whatever it might be, being more aware of their body, they're doing it with an intention to get rid of the emotion, doing an intention to reduce the emotion. And that's actually not what we want to do, right? We actually just want to teach people that when I'm dealing with this emotion, first and foremost, I want to get familiar with it, right? For example, if every single time I get stressed out, I get panicked, I get overwhelmed, I go and rush to, smoke, or I go and rush to grab a bottle or whatever it is I do, right? We want you to slow down and we want you to really think to yourself, let's get curious, right? What do I do when I'm stressed out? What do I do when I'm angry, right? What am I feeling right now? And what are my urges telling me to do, right? Mm-hmm. When I'm slowing something down, like you said, right, I can kind of control it, but more so in a sense, I have more agency with it, right? I have more ability to do something different.
Yeah. Yes. That's such a better way of saying it.
No.
Have agency now, right? I like what you said about you're not getting rid of the emotion because, most of us, I mean, you and I are completely different generations, but, I was taught, stop crying or I give you something to cry about, right? Or don't be so emotional. Don't be so dramatic or whatever, which unfortunately, was a message I gave my kids too. It was a mistake, one of my many parenting mistakes. But the goal isn't to get rid of the emotion or to feel better. I always say it's not to feel better; it's to feel better. Like it's
Exactly.
to feel it better, right?
Yep, exactly.
But we're so quick to say, I got to get rid of this. It feels uncomfortable. I got to get rid of it, and that just suppresses it, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100% blows it up.
Yeah. And I love the word curious. So for the listeners, curiosity over condemnation is always kind of a key word that I say in terms of if you're condemning yourself for feeling that way, it's only going to make it worse. But be curious about why am I feeling this way is important. Right. Yeah. Yes. Thank you for that. And one more thing that you said that I want to highlight when I double click is that what you said was what is in front of you triggering you emotionally a lot of time, well, almost every time, is not that person and not that situation in front of you in the moment. It's something from the past. Can you talk about that a little more? I want to make sure we get that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, like, when we're talking about, let's say, a feeling, right? And let's say, we're in the grocery store or at work or something, and someone like rejects us, right? Sometimes people will take that rejection and make it this huge meaning of what it means about their character, what it means about them as a person. And they really internalize that belief system. But for example, they're coming to me talking about this, right? Well, let's talk about it. Where did you get that belief from? When did you first start feeling that way? Were you 4 years old? Were you 10 years old? Was it when, your dad left? Was it when, your parents wouldn't pick you up from school? Was it when, you had a really big incident happen to you and no one showed up for you? No one cared about how you were feeling, right? And it's not always that grand, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, like when we start getting more curious about where these belief systems come from, and we start befriending those belief systems and really slowing down. And I just really want to highlight the slowing down piece here. And I say that because so many people with high anxiety, with trauma, with, people that are in addiction and stuff like that, right? Like they never take time to slow down. Everything is so impulsive. Everything needs to move at the speed of light. Everything's very immediate. And the thing is, when we slow down, we have so much more ability to really go into our emotional experience, to really get curious about those emotions. Now, I will say, when it comes to slowing down, this is where some of the grounding work comes in. People face roadblocks, right? Like people don't want to go there. We think back to, I work with some people and I'll ask like, well, when was the first time you felt that way, right? A lot of people will say either I don't know or that doesn't matter. Like that was so long ago, right? But even that response, that doesn't matter, it was so long ago, right? Why do you feel that way? What makes you say to yourself that it doesn't matter, right? Who's that little boy inside of you, or who's that little person inside of you that is telling you that your feelings don't matter, right? Is that your voice? Is that your parents? Is that society? What does that actually do to the part of you that feels like this does matter, right? That's the piece that I really want them to make the connection with, right? And it's hard to face that. It's very difficult.
I love that. I love it. Yeah. So for us in a practical sense, if let's say we are rejected, let's say we get ghosted. That's one of my favorites. Let's say we get ghosted and, we think it's, what did I do? That's always my first question. Well, what did I do? I did something. Let me go search. Let me go scroll back in all the text conversations and where did I do it wrong? Right. Or did they see me? Did they see a picture of me they didn't like? All these, that's the reel that goes on, right, in my head, because I personalize it. But like you're saying, if I were to stop and say, and this is for you listeners too, to say, when does this exact same emotion, when did it first show up for me? Right. And then of course, like Drake is saying, if your first reaction is this is bullshit, then you need to then take a little sidebar to say, why do you think it's bullshit? Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Because you were probably told your opinion was bullshit or something, whatever. But yeah, if you can pinpoint if you can let your mind go back to the first time you felt that, I know this is what I've been doing for so long now. And then, okay, this is me at 6 years old when dad didn't take me fishing like he promised, or, whatever. That's what that's about. Not that this stupid person, not stupid person, but this person that I've never met that could be not even real has ghosted me on a dating app, right? Yeah. Great. Good. Slow down. I love that. So one thing that I wanted to get into and that you offer, as I noticed on your website and that we haven't talked about on the podcast, is EMDR. I've been asked about that several times in my DMs about, can you cover EMDR? So can you talk to me like a 2-year-old? Tell me what does EMDR stand for, but what is it?
Sure. Yeah. So first, it stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing therapy. Okay. And that's a fancy way of basically saying, just to kind of break it down. So when people come in for EMDR, what we're doing is we are taking memories that are still highly reactive. So memories that we have a big emotional response to, memories that feel like there's a big, pull from, right? This doesn't mean we're like boohoo crying about the memory or anything like that sometimes, right? But it could be anything from a rape. It could be an assault. It could be, like you kind of were saying, like my dad wouldn't show up for me, right? Or like my mom was very volatile in the household, right? Like kind of memories like that, right? But there has to be an emotional charge, right? Okay. And the reason why is because if there's not an emotional charge there, you can't necessarily always process. So what I mean by that is like that memory is not fully processed, right? It's somewhere in the working memory. It's something there that feels like it's trapped in the part of our brain where the fear response is activated, right? So our brain obviously has different associations. So when we face things like rejection, someone raising their voice, conflict, anger, whatever it might be, right? Our brain jumps to those different memories, right? So our brain's going to, when someone's upset with me, it means that they're going to leave me. When I disappoint someone, it means that they're going to get really, really angry with me and maybe hurt me, right? Whether that's conscious or unconscious, that's where our brain will go to if those memories are left unprocessed, depending on what we're talking about, right? So that's a fancy way of saying basically, we bring up the memory in EMDR. We talk a lot about, because of this memory, what are the negative beliefs you started believing about yourself, right? Did you feel like I'm defective? I'm unlovable. I'm unworthy. My needs don't matter, right? Just some of the few that tend to come up a lot. And we talk about those belief systems first and, how they come up right now in your life, right? So we talk about, because I feel like I'm unlovable, that makes me act this way, right? That makes me self-sabotage. That makes me repeat cycles that I don't want to repeat in, right? That makes me do things that I'm not proud of, right? And then we go into it by matching that with a memory. So maybe we start with something more recent. We don't necessarily have to start with the most intense thing ever. I think that's a misconception some people have about EMDR. And we go from that memory, we go into usually 10 to 20-ish seconds of intervals where we do something called bilateral stimulation. That's a fancy way of basically saying we operate the right and left side of the brain. So all we're doing with that is a few different things we could do. So we either do this, so we take up our fingers, we go really, really quickly in front of somebody's eyes, because we're operating the eyes moving back and forth. We can use a ball, we can use tappers, a light, anything that's going to help activate the right side and left side of the brain at the same time as we focus on that memory. What this is doing is, in that 10 to 20 second interval, you're getting pretty heightened exposure to the memory, to those emotions, to those sensations that are so uncomfortable, right? And it's helping your brain naturally process that to go to long-term memory, right? And when I say long-term memory, I'm saying that after we do some of these things, after we get some desensitization done to the memory, we can feel like this is just an objective thing that happened to me, right? I can acknowledge this was horrible, it was awful, but it's not feeling like this big emotional, physical pull where I just feel like it's life consuming. I feel overwhelmed by it. I feel like, my heart's going to burst out of me, or I feel like I'm in tears every single time, right? We're more able to recall the factual information and the feelings around it, but we don't get caught up in it, right? And when we do this, we also go into the reprocessing part, which is what we're talking about. But then we also go into the consolidation piece, right? So the way EMDR works, the theory is at least, when it comes to REM sleep, which in REM sleep, basically, that's when you go to sleep, you get that deep sleep. Your memories are being consolidated. They're being processed of like kind of what you took in throughout the day, different memories coming up, that type of thing.
Hmm.
With EMDR, it's kind of the theory is it's paired with REM sleep, because in REM sleep, your eyes tend to dart back and forth, right? The same way EMDR when you're doing this, right?
Hmm.
So your memories tend to be processed through the night when you sleep that night after an EMDR session. We're also going into it from a framework of we're adding in a positive belief. So when we subtract a belief, we also want to add in a belief, right? So for example, I'll never get better, or my needs don't matter, right? It could be something along the lines of my needs do matter, just maybe the opposite, or, I can face anxiety and be okay, or I can keep myself safe now, or whatever that might be. But I'll stop there.
Yeah. Wow. That's a lot. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to get this right. So if I go into you, you're going to want to ask me to pick a memory that has that has a charge to it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just choose one. Anyone?
Yes. So it depends, right? So I want to be sure the biggest thing here, we want to keep someone in their window of tolerance, right? So we want to be sure someone feels like ready to work on something. Again,
Okay.
I don't want to choose to go for them. I want them to choose for
Right.
themselves
Okay.
if they feel ready.
Yeah. Okay. So a highly reactive memory, something that has an emotional charge. And then I'm going to watch your fingers or watch something to make my eyes move back and forth. And then are you having me speak through the memory at that time, or am I reliving it in my mind, or what?
So usually people relive it in their mind.
Okay.
There's also an audio version too. So sometimes if people have a hard time focusing as it's going back and forth with their eyes, some people close their eyes, they'll have the sound just go back and forth.
Oh.
And as they're doing it, they're kind of just letting whatever come up.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, I was wondering if I could think and watch watch something at the same time. Okay. And so as you're watching or thinking about it, and then how do you get to what the belief system is that came from that charged memory?
Yeah. So a lot of times we actually do that work before we start processing, right? And I say that because sometimes it takes a little bit of talking to kind of unravel some of it, right? So it comes from, me maybe asking you a lot of different questions about, well, when you were a kid, you talk about this anxiety you feel now, this tightness in your chest. What are the other times you felt that way, right? Or when you get rejected, let's think about it. What do you feel about yourself? Do you feel responsible for everything? Do you feel like everything relies on you? Like my needs don't matter. We kind of just start inputting there. However, a lot of times when we start the processing, so much naturally comes out where people will say I feel alone, or I'm invisible, or I'm not in control, right? And that's part of the processing where we're deepening, we're going into that experience. And when people do that, the brain, a lot of times makes these natural connections of what that negative cognition really is, what that true fear really is.
Okay. Yeah. So if the memory reveals that I will always be alone, let's say, if that's a belief system, then you're going to take that and match it up to memories, but are you going to take it up to, you're going to match it to kind of what's going on in my life right now, or how it's showing up in my life now? Is that something that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So sometimes some people feel more activated with more recent events, right? So let's say it's a date rejection someone goes to, or whatever, and that, belief gets activated, right? I'll always be alone because no one responds to me. People ghost me, right? We might go into that as a window, right? Let's start with the recent rejection. Let's start with the person that ghosted you, right? It doesn't have to be a 10 out of 10 on the stress scale, but it just is a window into the bigger picture of what this is to you, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. And then you're going to replace the I'll always be alone with a more positive belief. That's the consolidation.
Yeah, exactly. So we want to clean up the stuff in there though first, right? We can't just paper over it and say, things are going to be great. No, that's not now we're going to do it, right? There's some validity to how we feel. That's also important to validate, some of those feelings, because there was time periods where it was true, I was alone, right? And people did abandon me and people did screw me over. That is all real and true. And that's good to validate that experience. That's part of the EMDR. It's validating the fact that, you were alone. Right. But at the same time, maybe a positive cognition could be something along the lines of I have the ability to make and maintain connections. I have the ability to make and have community and relationships, right? It could be a lot of different things we can kind of input into there, right? We're kind of wanting to build up some of that positive, neural networks that are going on for those people.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. The validation part I want to mention too, because I think it's important for anybody to, because if somebody, for instance, if somebody is objectively, in the queer community, objectively hot, right? Like they have a body, blah, blah, blah. They have the look that every gay wants, right? But they have a belief that they're not good enough, that their body's not good enough, or, they're physically not ugly. Let's just say I'm ugly, right? When I have seen people that are objectively beautiful say something about being imperfect physically or not being attractive, and then I see all these other people jump in and say, what are you talking about? Look at you, blah, 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 And to me, it's like you're invalidating their belief system, right? I mean, if that's the way they believe, then that's the way they believe. But I think validating that it probably is something they never experienced, because everybody always says, it probably says to them, what the hell are you saying? Look at you, right? But I think there's such value in healing in validating someone when they're having an experience, no matter what you think from your viewpoint is true or not. Is that right?
Exactly. 100%. Yeah. It goes such a long way, right? You're like forming trust, you're forming safety within yourself, but then also with the community around you.
Yeah. Okay. So if let's say I'm using crystal, I can't stop. I'm in this trauma cycle. What are the implications of EMDR for me? Like how does that plug into addiction recovery?
Sure. Absolutely. So I think a few things, right? Like, if someone can't stop, we tend to not go into, these are some protocols for substance use, but we tend not to go into the full trauma processing just yet. And I say that because the last thing, again, I want to do is overwhelm somebody, make them stop coming to therapy. They make therapy a stressful experience. Like, therapy is going to be a little bit stressful regardless, a lot of times, not all the time. But I don't want them to I find that so many people are already so avoidant as is. The last thing I want to do is push them too far and they feel like they're not in a space where they're ready to do that. So what do I do different with the EMDR in that regard? I tend to focus on the positive part, right? So for example, we want to reduce the attractiveness of meth, right? We want to reduce the attractiveness of the substances in general, and what that means is I think a lot of times, let's look at the belief system someone has with meth, right? Like, I feel helpless to my addiction. I feel like I can't be who I want to be without meth. I can't have sex the way I want to have sex without meth, right? Like I can't function the way I want to function in my relationships or my community without meth, right? It's giving me this confidence that I have. So we really want to target some of those things where we feel this really strong attachment to meth, right? We want to focus on that first in the therapeutic lens, right? That doesn't necessarily have to be done through EMDR per se, right? It could be. And when I say it could be, I mean in the sense of like, maybe we're focusing on some of the bad experiences we've had with meth, focusing on the negative experiences it's had with my relationships, right? Like, what have I lost because of it? What have I like avoided because of my addiction, right? Like that can be a really huge thing to kind of build up in terms of like fixations, right? I find so much of the time, some people also come into treatment and they glorify, the use of it, right? They want to talk about the positives of it, which is okay. But I think at the same time, we don't want to get caught up in glorifying the substance, right? We don't get caught up in like just making it seem like this almighty thing that's like is just helps us so much, right? That is okay to say though, right? But I also think the other piece is, we talk about targeting cravings and triggers, right? So like going back to one of the points I was making earlier, we talk a lot about like, when I'm getting a trigger, what is the emotion I'm experiencing, right? What am I trying to get away from? What am I trying to solve in the situation? When I get a craving, what am I trying to achieve, right? What am I trying to feel, right? And sometimes when we do some of the pre-EMDR work, when I say pre-EMDR work, again, we're kind of slowing down, doing some of the grounding work, doing some of that stabilization. This is kind of opening some of those doors, right? And when someone gets to a place where they're able to face some of those things, they feel ready to do some of those things, I think we're more able to do that. I do want to talk a little bit about like different frequencies of addiction, I'd say, because I think that also matters when it comes to this too, or how it
Yeah.
affects our yeah.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that for sure. I'm interested in what that, and that word frequency is that's the one that's a word that we haven't heard on the podcast before. But I do want to stop and say and just kind of reiterate something that you said, and that is reducing the attraction, right? Because I get these DMs, and you can tell, within 5 minutes of the language that you're using, right? Like, I'll never have sex without it. I will never be able to function without it. I can't work without it. I can't be a real person without it. Like, these disempowering comments and statements really show what your belief is around it. How are you supposed to, you're so conflicted when you say you want to stop, but you also say, I can't function without it. It's gas and brake. You're like, how are you supposed to move forward if your underlying belief is that I can't function without it? Kind of like my underlying belief is I'll always be alone, but I'm trying to date somebody. If I believe I'm always going to be alone, right, I'm going to find every reason and every avenue to make that true. Is that right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I think that like that goes right into it, right? Is like when we talk about, the way these beliefs inform our behavior, I think that's the entire piece here, right? Like if I feel and I fall into the beliefs that I'm helpless to my addiction, that I'm just never going to get better. I can't possibly have the self-confidence without meth. I can't possibly have sex without meth, right? We're going to do things that justify that belief, right? We're going to relapse. We're going to have sex. We're going to use, meth to have sex. We're going to engage in chemsex. We're going to, only engage in certain relationships because I feel like that's what I deserve. I feel like that's what I need for myself, right? And I find that a lot of times, it has to go with the active choice of going against that, right? And that's really difficult. But I say that because when we slow our thoughts down and we think to ourselves, okay, if I engage in this behavior, all I'm doing is feeding that, negative belief network that I'm helpless to this, right? That it can never get better. But instead, if I choose vulnerability, if I choose to experience my emotions of discomfort, because that's a lot of what it comes down to, right? I'm just so uncomfortable. I'm so anxious. Like I just feel like I can't tolerate it, right? We want to build that capacity. That's a huge piece here, is building capacity for your resiliency, right? Like you can tolerate the stress, you can tolerate the discomfort, but then also realizing, hey, like your brain, it needs time to recover. You've made these really strong associations that essentially, I can only do this thing if I'm under the influence, right? If I'm on meth, and that's the only time I can do it. But unfortunately, it's not just going to snap back, right? Our brains are plastic in the sense that they can change, they can reform, they can develop, they can make new associations, but they also need time to recover from the information you fed it, right? And that's a really hard thing when you have this really, really, really gratifying, thing that helps you just feel so good and feel so confident and so amazing for so much of it. And then you go into this and you feel horrible, right? You feel down, you feel unmotivated, you feel scared. But part of it is allowing yourself to feel scared, allowing yourself to face failure, to face rejection, and kind of really feeling those things in so that you can realize that, hey, I actually can tolerate this, right? Maybe not in like extreme doses. I'm not saying go out there and just like wing it, right? But like little by little, we want to expose ourselves to those emotions. We want to expose ourselves to those experiences so we can say, I can tolerate this. I can manage this.
I love that. Yeah, it's kind of like, when you want to build self-trust, you take some risks.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, and measured risks, I would say, in the beginning. Yeah. I love the negative belief network. So many people watch that channel, the negative belief network. Yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah. Good. That's really good stuff. Really good stuff. And for you, if you're listening or somebody who's stuck, is pay attention to the language, because your beliefs are basically your words, right? Your thoughts that you keep thinking become a belief. And if you believe whatever you believe about your relationship with meth is going to give you a really great indication of why you still relapse, why you're still using. right?
Yeah, exactly.
I love having somebody credentialed to back me up when I speak. Okay. All right. So frequencies of addiction. This is interesting. I'd like to hear more about what you mean by that.
Yeah, so, I think this kind of comes into, when we talk about treatment, right? So, for example, someone's using on the weekends and they're using it specifically for like chemsex or to release or to relax or whatever it might be, right? Versus someone that maybe uses daily or someone who uses like every other day and they use it to go to work or they use it for like other things, right? I feel like when it comes to treatment, I think that sometimes there's a little bit more to be done with people that use it for things like chemsex or things like, a few times a month. And the reason why I'm saying that is because it impacts them in different ways, right? So, for example, if it's an intimacy wound, we could still target an intimacy wound. We could still work on maybe decreasing the frequency of how much they engage, right? So maybe if they're doing it every single weekend, right? Maybe they do it all weekend long, right? Maybe they skip a weekend, or maybe they only do it one day, right? And when it comes to that, I do think that like we can target other wounds, right? Like if there's other wounds about self-esteem or other wounds about, maybe just communication or meeting up with other gay men, because that's something a lot of people feel too, is like, having, sex with another man is a lot for them or brings up a lot of emotions they haven't dealt with, right? Like we can kind of target some of those things. When it comes to people, when we're using every day or every other day, right? Like that's where trauma work gets a little tricky, like for example, if you're coming in the session and, you're having psychosis or you're having some like, meth induced panic or, whatever it might be, you're not in a state where your brain can retain that information, right? It can't really fully process things. So, I might want to get you to the part where, you can come to session where you haven't spoke today or, you haven't done anything like that so that we can process some of those things, right? Because it starts getting tricky in terms of like what's real and what's delusion, right? So like that's that's some of the tricky parts there, I'll say.
Yeah. So you said frequency. I'm in this like metaphysical like world of
I know. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
vibration, frequency.
No.
Yeah. I get it now. Yeah, I'm slow.
Yeah.
I told you have to talk to me like a 2-year-old.
No, you're good. Sorry.
No. But that's great. So back to intimacy wound, and then I'll talk more about the frequency. But how do I know if I have an intimacy wound?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways, but I think, if you have problems in your relationships, right? Like if you find that it's difficult to communicate, you shut down, you withdraw. Maybe you're overly combative in your relationships or you're very angry. Maybe it comes to you can't sustain a relationship, right? This could even go into friendships. I think a lot of times we focus more on like romantic relationships, but maybe we don't show up for friends. Maybe we don't show up for ourselves. We isolate, right? I think a lot of times those are a lot of ways, but outside of that too, like why can I not engage in sex without meth, right? Like what makes it so difficult? Obviously there's a chemical component there, right? I want to be very validating to that component because that's very real. But at the same part, like, how did this start? Was it always this way? Was I always using a substance, whether I started off with alcohol or weed or something else, like to engage in sex, right? And I really want to get like, I think the big part here is analyzing like, what is the feeling I was feeling before having sex, right? I had the craving to have sex, but what got in my way? Was it my fear of like seeing my body? Was it being vulnerable? Was it the fact that I'm gonna like have performance anxiety? Like what really was getting in your way there, right? I think those are like the big things I look out for in terms of like the intimacy issues.
Okay. Yeah, I hear that a lot. I have such anxiety having sex sober, because I mean, that's why a lot of people drink too, right?
Yep.
But of course, meth is like, will make you feel super sexual. You just forget whatever, right? Like I had a gentleman I worked with who used because he grew up very insecure about his penis size, right? But when he got on meth, he thought he had the biggest dick in the room. It's like, so that's a challenge, I would say, to go from that feeling to sober. You're so aware when you're sober, right? You're so aware of everything, and you remember like all those, everything you're talking about, the emotionally charged, what did you say? How did you say it? Highly reactive memories, emotionally charged memories. They're all right there when you're sober,
Yeah.
right? They're all blatantly yelling at you, right? Yeah. So I think just a little side note too, for listeners, is how to connect EMDR and your recovery is, if you can understand kind of these underlying beliefs, you're going to understand why your relationships are falling apart. You're going to understand why you lose that job or why you're in the job you don't like. You're going to understand all these parts that make up the constellation of why you are using. I mean, it really is a powerful way to get down to understanding what is underneath my life that has made it this way, right? What is fueling my reality at the moment? Because most of the time it's going to be from something. And like, I know from all of my therapeutic work, most of my trauma and most of the way that I see the world had to do with like little 30-second increments of time, little comments from my father, right? Just little comments. And those little comments stuck with me as a boy so hard, and then that created this belief that I'm not this and I'm not that, and I'm not, I'm not normal, and men are always going to leave me, right?
Yep.
And that's why I was, I've told this story before, but after every chemsex session, I was bawling and crying, and I felt like my heart had been ripped out because the guy left, because I had convinced this one was the one, right? So it happened every time. Anyway, enough about me. And what were we talking about? I got off on a tangent. But okay. Anyway, back to what we're saying here, and that is the frequency that you use. That's what we're talking about. Not vibrational frequency, but frequency that you use. So if you're saying, like, let's say you're a weekend warrior, as we've talked about on the show, you're saying that it would be best, probably, maybe a better application of the therapy if they could at least take a weekend off or decrease what they're doing so that they can kind of let those memories come out, I would say, right?
Yeah, let the memories come out, but then also have the experience to like slow down and say, my impulses are so high here. Like, can I try to do something alternative, right? Can I try to like focus on like my feelings here? Can I try to go into my experience, right? Can we have the willingness to see, like, I don't have to go through a whole weekend of doing this, right? I can do other things, but I can also like maybe sit with my emotions, see what comes up for me, right? Even if we have to start with, you take 15 minutes to do that, that still means something, right? Like, I'm a big proponent of like harm reduction, in my opinion, and like we're just working with people where they're at. But even if it's 10, 15 minutes of some exposure to you getting in touch with yourself, getting in touch with those emotions, that is so meaningful, right? We're starting off, because the truth is, like, so many people come into this work and they don't want to, even do the 10, 15 minutes. They don't want to even talk about it with me, but I think it's very, we can be brutally honest that there's no way around it. There's no magical method. We have to experience it. We have to move through it, and I think that if we start off in those smaller increments, sure, some people can do that and be like, hell no, like, I can't do it. I need to, go do my thing, and that's totally fine. But at least it gives us something. Maybe next time we can go up to 30 minutes, 45, or whatever that could be.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, instant gratification got you into this, right? In the first place. So what got you into it is not going to get you out of it. Yeah. That's my little quip there on that. Okay. Well, I think did I miss something about EMDR that would be important for us to know in terms of chemsex addiction?
I think the biggest thing I just want, listeners and people to know, I know some of this can sound really intimidating, but, if you work with a good therapist, like, they're going to meet you where you're at, like, it's not the therapist's job to push you too far. It's, up to you, what you feel ready to work with. You feel ready to stop using even a little bit, or whatever that might mean. And also, like, you can do this work, I'm not going to say while using daily, but like, you could still get into some of this work, and I want people to know that. I think a lot of times people avoid therapist and therapy because they feel like they're going to be pushed too far, or they keep relapsing. They're like, what's the point, but there's still meaning there.
That's right. That's right. That's right. I'm glad you said that too. I want you as a listener to see too, and you correct me if I'm wrong here. Like if EMDR maybe doesn't jive with you, there are other options. But at the end of the day, aren't you trying to get to the same objective here in terms of what are the beliefs that are running my life? Where did they come from, and how do I replace them? Right?
Exactly.
Isn't that right?
100%.
Yeah. I had a question. I put out. Usually I post to clients, I post on the Facebook page for questions when I'm doing a podcast. I only got one. I got a question about, there's a recovery center who's offering EMDR, but they're interns. Okay. And so he's saying, is it as effective for somebody who is not even certified yet? And that leads me to a question. If I was a listener, I would ask, what do I look for if I want EMDR treatment? What are some questions I would ask to make sure I'm getting an effective facilitator?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So I think, a few things, to answer the first question about the interns, of course, interns are going to have less experience. So there's going to be maybe some wiggle room there, but I wouldn't necessarily write them off. I think the good thing about interns is sometimes those people are very eager and very, willing to learn. They learn new information and they can be really great in terms of like facilitating some of this work. Will there be some learning curves potentially, right? Like I'm not going to write that off, but I don't think, you should write them off as a whole because they do think they could provide some valuable work. Outside of that, in terms of like questions for looking for an EMDR practitioner, I think asking them like, what is their experience with substance use? What's their experience with men who have sex with men, queer culture, chemsex, all of that. I think it's all relevant. And then also asking like, what is your approach to this, right? Like, are you going to ask me that I need to stop using totally? Are you going to tell me that I can't engage in trauma work or EMDR until like I'm totally like off methamphetamines? Or is it like, okay, that I am a weekend warrior or I do use a few days a week, right? Like, what do you feel? Because there is a lot of practitioners who they feel differently than me, right? Some people feel like, well, like, you need to decrease this and I don't want you to relapse and X, Y, and Z. But, I think it's very different. People have such different scenarios, right? Like everyone has a different level of comfort. There's going to be some people that maybe I say, I don't want to go there just yet. But I do think it's important to ask that practitioner just for your own comfort too, right? The last thing I think you want to do is be lying to your therapist and telling them like, no, like I'm not doing this because you want to get started with the work because you're eager, right? I want you to feel like, can I be honest with you and trust you with this information and still, have some boundaries? Because I think it is important for people to know, like, you're not always like ready to go there, right? Like maybe you're not at the point where like we think it's good, right? But sometimes like we can explore it, right? Will your practitioner be open to that? I think that's really important.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I could go in, like, I guess there's this part of me that thinks I'm going to jump right in to go right into the, the fucking deep trauma, but you could start with, a belief around, or maybe a negative charge around something small, right? Like I'm not good. Exactly. I'm not a good baseball thrower. I throw like a girl.
Yeah. 100%.
Right. Yeah, which I do, but I've accepted.
I do too.
I've accepted that. But yeah, I mean, you could start there, right? In something that's non-invasive or not as evasive.
100%. Yeah. You don't even have to start with things related to like meth, right? You could start with like totally other like things not related at all, right? Or things with like some relation. It doesn't have to be about that,
Yeah, and then you learn the tools, and as you get and then as you go deeper, you can still practice those tools in your life.
Exactly, 100%. Because the first thing we do is stabilization.
Stabilization. I like that word. Okay, so real quick, your practice. Do I have to live in Illinois or Florida to work with you?
Yeah, so I am located in Illinois, Florida, and Virginia. I'm only virtual right now. I take most insurance plans. I am pretty full, but I'm looking to hire I'm looking to hire a couple people in the next year. So,
well, I saw that you went against advice and started your own practice.
Yeah,
I saw your post about that, and it's obviously successful if you're full and hiring.
Yeah, no, it's doing well. Yeah.
Good for you. Good for you for doing that. And it looks like you work with internal family systems as well.
Yeah, that's something we didn't talk about in today's episode, but the IFS, internal family systems, tend to pair really well with EMDR. That's parts work for the listeners, if you're not
Yeah.
familiar with IFS, but
Yeah.
the parts work going into kind of what we talked about today, like the inner child work, kind of figuring, fleshing those things out, works really well with this.
Yes. Okay. And on ignitinghope.info, Drake's website, there's learn more about EMDR therapy, what it is, procedure effectiveness, all that stuff. You can learn more about that and see how that resonates with you. But I see this being very helpful for anyone who's really stuck. Just stuck in the relapse. And that's the people that come to me. They're usually like every 2 months or every 3 months. Why do I keep going back to this? I don't want to, but those are my particular clients. Now, I see myself as like a bridge to get somebody away from the substance long enough to go get therapized, to go get EMDR, right? So that you can be your most cognizant self, critical thinking self, and online as much as you can be, and then go get therapy. That's kind of what I see my role as a chemsex coach. So I think that works well with you. Okay. Well, Drake, what did I miss today? What should I have asked that you wish I had have asked, or I do not prepare for the podcast, by the way. If you're listening, I don't prepare questions. We just wing it.
I prepared some of it. Yeah. I mean, no, you think essentially we covered everything for the most part, but yeah. We're good.
Okay, good. Well, okay. And if you're pretty full right now, but can people still contact you?
Yeah, they can still contact me, like here and there. Like I have openings, and it's always changing. Summertime tends to be a little slower, so
yeah.
We'll see.
Okay. Well, we'll put your website in the show notes and any other information you want us to as well.
Awesome. No, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for your time. And thank you for listening. I appreciate it very much. If you want to add to the conversation, you can start a thread on YouTube underneath, or you can go to Spotify and make a comment there. If you have questions, you can also go in the Facebook community. You can also ask questions. And if you have questions for Drake, you can reach out to him or ask me. But I'd like to hear what you think about EMDR, if you have experiences with it, positive or negative, and why, and also if you're interested, and if you are EMDR curious, I'd like to hear about that too, so we can start the conversation. So, all right, guys, we'll see you next week.